Having a traumatic health experience goes farther than the physical complications. It has a psychological impact on the person when you go through it, for having gone through it, and a lot of the times for having to learn how to live with it. As if life wasn't complex enough to figure out and navigate sometimes, when we add a condition that can literally make you disabled and shape your life forever at a very young age, life becomes a lot harder to navigate. Fortunately, cases like the ones we'll be discussing today are not the norm, but what seems to be the norm is the lack of guidance and education as we grow up when it comes to confronting hard realities and ultimately dealing with life in a way that will help us have a better experience on Earth. I am beyond excited to have had the opportunity to meet the trainee health psychologist Nicola O'Donnell and being part of her research study. Nicola is a PhD student working with the Epidemiology and Cancer Statistics group at the University of York. Her PhD is funded by the Childhood Eye Cancer charity, CHECT, a small but very impactful foundation that we both work with. Nicola has more than 6 years of experience working clinically and has developed several psychoeducation intervention programs for different pathologies. But currently, she is focusing on developing a psychoeducation intervention for young people who have had retinoblastoma. And that hits home for me. Cancer of the retina or retinoblastoma is an aggressive eye cancer that usually affects children under 5. Approximately 8,000 children around the world develop retinoblastoma every year, which makes it a rare type of cancer. Besides the common effects from having any type of cancer as a child and going through cancer treatments, there are specific side effects for retinoblastoma patients that can show throughout their lives. On this episode, Nicola and I will go over how retinoblastoma has affected survivors from a psychological point of view and how to create a better approach moving forward. The combination of her knowledge, her research, and my experience, I think made this episode extremely relatable and insightful for a lot of people. Nicola, thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor to have you on my podcast. I wouldn't want to have anyone else at the moment, considering what you're going through with your work, your research, having you share everything you've learned and just all the research that you've done, and just a piece of your brain really on my podcast as you are putting it together is just so exciting for me. So thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
And for all the work that you're doing, which is pretty amazing. I admire you. I keep telling you, not just you, but everyone in your field that is actually looking at psychological impact of different traumatic illnesses and things that we go through a lot of the times. But especially something that hits home for me, obviously, is RB.
Mm-hmm.
And, the consequences that being an RB survivor has in you. But I wanted to start with something really basic, but that at the same time is extremely deep, which is that you keep repeating every time I've spoken to you. For you, it seems to be really, really important, which is the concept of psychoeducation.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean really, and the impact of it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, firstly, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's an honour to be here. And yeah, psychoeducation or psychoeducation interventions are, it's a bit of psychobabble, really. It doesn't make a lot of sense to people who aren't in the psychology field, which is bad and needs a new word. So essentially, it's a way to therapeutically provide people with relevant, up-to-date information about their health in order to support them to live with or beyond a diagnosis. And as it's called an intervention, you'd therefore expect there to be some support. And there isn't one kind or one particular way that can look. It could be an app that supports people. It could be a workshop or a skills training group, individual sessions, a website. It's essentially any evidence-based tool or process which helps an individual and their family to better understand and cope with an illness.
Right. And obviously you are specializing in, or focusing primarily in RB, right? Which is also how we got to meet and how we got in touch and why we built kind of like this friendship now. We both collaborate with CHECT, which is an amazing small but really impactful charity, a UK charity around child eye cancer.
Yeah, the Childhood Eye Cancer Trust, who actually fund me as a researcher. So I'm very grateful for them and the work that they do. Yeah,
exactly. And I do collaborate with them as well. Not on that way.
Equally important ways though.
Yeah. But in the way that I can provide most value. So we met because I had the honor to be part of Nicola's research or study, be one of the, I think it's 32 people you said?
Yeah, 32 people generously volunteered to take part in the study, which was beyond our expectations. It was fantastic.
Yeah. And what was the study about? Because I know we mentioned psychoeducation and how important it is to be aware of the psychological impact of any traumatic illness that you could go through, being cancer or anything else. But what are you studying, really?
Yeah, so at the moment I am ultimately doing quite a big project that CHECT are funding me to do, to propose a new psychoeducation intervention for young people who've had retinoblastoma, so the rare eye cancer that we're talking about today. And that's a big piece of work that will take a number of years,
right? Despite
it, I'd like it to be quicker, but we've got to do it all properly and make sure it's scientific and effective and all of those things. So that's the overall aim. But the study that we met on was an interview study where I spoke to 32 teenagers and young adults, all survivors of RB, about their experiences after having that diagnosis and treatment, whether that was positive, negative, and any psychological challenges that they faced as a result, because ultimately those experiences will mostly inform the intervention that we go on to develop.
Right, exactly. And when I was told that there was someone out there doing what Nicola was doing, which is literally doing a whole paper around the psychological impact of RB in someone's life, I was just baffled, because for me, I feel like it's only been recently that I have started to realize the impact of being an RB survivor psychologically. I feel like we tend to disassociate, whatever we go through and whatever we have gone through in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With RB, focusing a lot on the physical aspects and the medical aspects of things. So how are your eyes doing, or how is your eye doing? What are the treatments that you received and the impact that had on your different parts of your body, or all those things. But I never ever in my life received psychological help, or not even because it wasn't available for me and I didn't have access to it, but I think it wasn't even something that people thought about. Even my parents, you always look at the individual, things that an RB survivor can go through afterwards, which is visual impairment or disabilities of some kinds of, for me, for example, severe dry eye or high intraocular pressure. I mean, could be anything, but I never even had the conversation around how is this going to impact your life ultimately. And I love something that you touch on your research and documents that I've read from you, where you speak about problem solving skills and how important it is to just develop, ways of coping with your reality as a child that will eventually allow you to have a more just a better life in general as an adult, and not have to cope with bigger and deeper issues like the ones that we as adults, for example, I go to therapy myself, and now I'm working through things that perhaps had I had psychological support when I was a child, my life wouldn't be, I'm not saying my life is terrible, but it would be different, right?
Yeah.
It would be more equipped.
Yeah. And I think, sadly, I don't think you're alone in that. So the whole reason that my research came about was because other researchers, other studies have pointed out that, cancers like RB can have a wide-ranging, long-lasting psychological impact, both in terms of self-esteem, confidence, anxiety, frustration, low mood. It can be wide-ranging and from mild to severe. And we know that there is currently no routine psychological support offered to young people in this group. So that's what we want to change. And as we've talked about before, it's much easier to work in a preventative way. So giving everybody the tools that they need to, manage difficult emotions and difficult feelings before they get to a point of actually needing them, because it's much easier to equip people before they need it rather than try and support someone down from a really difficult time.
Right. As you mentioned, like I understand that you focus on RB and the specifics of it. So that RB being obviously conserve the retina and what that means for your eyes and for your vision and the effects that has in your body. But it could be anything, right? You yourself, you have done a lot of work with cancer patients. So yeah, like, do you see a lot of differences with patients that have had RB versus other kind of trauma?
I think that's a really good question, and I would always say that it's an individual thing. So, your experience with RB is probably really different to someone else's experience with RB, and it may be similar or different to someone's experience with different cancers or other traumatic events. I think it can be so wide-ranging, and it's important to think of everybody as an individual. Like you said, I work with adults with various diagnoses of cancer in my clinical job within the NHS, not RB related at all. And I do see some crossovers. I see people who are struggling with their identity after having cancer. I see people who are feeling really anxious about cancers, returning in the future, or what that might mean for them and their family. And I know that's some of the concerns that some people with RB have as well. So I think there certainly is crossovers, but ultimately how everyone's affected is very individual and may change over time as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think we spoke about it before. Obviously, we had lots of conversations at this point, and we were speaking about how, because Nicola does a lot of research around teenagers and young adults, but especially teenagers. We were speaking about how a lot of teenagers, or some of them that are RB survivors, they don't want to identify with being one. They almost want to forget about it, and pretend like that never happened to them, and they just move on with their lives, and kind of like refuse for that to be their story, which, it's absolutely fine. I mean, as you said, people have different journeys and just different things that work for them. And for me, maybe speaking about it and analyzing the hell out of it, every single detail, might be the way to just digest it and process it and accept it. For others, doing the opposite might be the right way to go about it. And I love that you touched on identity, because I feel like, again, coming back to teenagers, what are the main difficulties, the main struggles that you see psychologically with teenagers that have to not only deal with puberty and just being a teenager, but also such a trauma?
Yeah, and I think you're right. Adolescence for the average person is tricky. I certainly wouldn't want to go back there myself.
Oh, me neither. Oh my God.
I think, like you say, you've got puberty, you've got hormones flying about everywhere, you've got the transition from primary to secondary school, which comes with a huge amount of differences, academic pressure, different expectations. You're more concerned with how you look and what other people think about you. So that's going on for all of us. And then you throw in having had childhood cancer, which may or may not have impacted your vision or how you look. And it gets a whole lot more complex. Not for everyone, but for many. And what I've heard is that, through talking to survivors of RB through my research, that is typically the most difficult time, and the time when people wish they'd had support. So, I've a conversation that's come up quite regularly, and it's almost been a bit of debate between different individuals, is the concept of disability and am I disabled? Because, it's not whether you classify yourself as such or not that's the problem. It's the perception that people bring externally to you. So I've had people say, I've had people assume things about me because I have my schoolwork printed in larger text so that I can see it, or I sit closer to the board, and that makes people think that I'm not capable or I'm not clever. Or people say, well, you look a bit different, so that must mean that you're, not able to do things. And of course, that's not true. It's the assumptions that people make about you, I think. I don't know if you found that in your experience.
Definitely. I feel like for me, I would lie if I said there has been one point in my life where, I understood certain things, and my whole life changed, and my whole perception changed around my condition and everything. It hasn't been one point. It's been understanding and working through patterns and behaviors, and most importantly, beliefs. So the belief system of, if they see me as someone weak, then that must mean that's basically letting the outside world define you, define who you are, and most importantly, believe it. Saying that has to come hand in hand with something that you talk about a lot, which I love, which is acceptance, right? I say that it has to come hand in hand because you can also fall in the trap, which I have for a lot of years, of, this is not going to define me. I'm much more than this. These people is not going to define me. I am not only not weak, but I'm better than all of you. I can do more than all of you. And that's an immense amount of pressure that you put on yourself to have to constantly overperform, so that it compensates the disability, the weakness, or whatever you perceive as what's wrong with me.
Yeah, overcompensating. I was going to say, it sounds very much like you think got to excel everywhere so that people don't think that I'm, in your words, weak. It's about what other people think of you, and which we know is so important for most people, particularly when we're young teenagers and adults.
Exactly that. And I feel like that's honestly a journey and a lesson that we all learn as teenagers. I feel that this is a conversation that resonates with a lot of people, regardless of whether they've been through cancer or not, or any other illness or any other thing. But especially for us, because as you said, identity before, when you're a teenager, and again, we spoke about this, you're constantly trying to find out who you are, to how you want to dress, to who do you want to be in the group of friends. Like, who do you want to be? Do you want to be that girl, or do you want to be that girl? Do you want, how do you want to speak? How do you want to wear? Like, what image do you want to kind of project? And when you have certain things that get in the way that you have not chosen, because nobody has chosen to, have to deal with certain conditions or look a certain way, or it can get extremely frustrating, because now you're being defined by this thing that you hate, that you wish it wasn't there, and that you cannot get rid of. So teenage years, man, like, it's just really, really, really hard. And I don't say that in a condescending way at all when I say teenage years. Whoever, because again, with my content, I want a lot of different people that's in different stages of the RB journey, being young adults, being teenagers, being parents of children, being relatives of people that have had RB, whatever it is. But I would love if each and one of them would be able to take a piece of this and be inspired in some way. But if I could speak now to the teenagers and the younger adults, something I would say is do the work now. Do the work now, because avoiding doing the work, and when I say doing the work, is really sitting down with yourself and analyzing those thoughts that you're having, the anxiety that you have, and where is it coming from? How can you face your demons, really, if you want to talk, if you want to call them like that. You just set yourself to a much better path. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of how soon the psychoeducation should start.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised some really good points there, and some really difficult things as well that you've experienced in your life. And I can hear, how passionately you want that to be different for people who are younger. Yeah. It's a tricky one, because again, it is so individual. So there'll be some people who are wanting and mature enough and ready to have certain amounts of information, and start learning about different ways to understand emotions and manage emotions. People who'll be ready to do that when they're 8 years old, and other people who won't be ready till they're 18. And people feel differently about the same thing at different times. So I think it's about working with the individual, working with your clinical team to sort of assess individually where someone's at and whether they're ready to access information and skills. From talking to lots of teenagers and young adults who've had RB, like I mentioned earlier, it's the preventative approach that is most needed, I think. So just integrating this into conversations that you have with your clinical team every time you go. So having a space to talk about how you think and feel, because you're obviously a really insightful adult who is able to do that, but we need to teach young children how to think in that way, because it's just not something that we're done. We've been taught to do. We've never been particularly good at teaching emotional literacy, emotional understanding to any young people. So it's quite an abnormal thing for most people to do, to sit and think about how you're feeling and be vulnerable in that way. So right. I think integrating it from a young age, but then having some sort of support available pre-adolescence seems to be the key time as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what you think, if for your experience, if you think that would be useful.
I think that I would have loved to. So I'm doing the work now as an adult, but I'm putting in the work by going to therapy and thinking about stuff and being really honest with myself. Most importantly, changing my behavior in a practical way, very slowly, step by step, very tiny little steps. Because again, I feel like, and this is something I'm conscious about all the time when creating content, is that this is this big topic and these big concepts that are sometimes really hard to understand, as in we get it. Psychoeducation, yes, okay. My child was diagnosed with RB and got treated. We got over that hump. What now? How does that look in a practical way? Because for me, yes, to answer your question, it would have been extremely beneficial to have that support. But I think in a way, not as a teenager, but as a child, I had it through my mom. Because I had an amazing mom that was really conscious of the fact that she had to learn how to become a parent of a child that has had that condition, RB, and that now deals with the consequences of it. So she acted as sort of my therapist very early on in my life. But at the end of the day, they can only do so much. They're not magicians. And your teenage years, as we spoke about before, sometimes you don't want, and you told me this from your researchers, sometimes you don't want to speak to your parents or anyone close to you about what you're going through, because you don't want them to perceive you as weak, or you don't even want to worry them sometimes.
Yeah, I think, and of course there's going to be people like you who have, you know, parents who are really tuned into their emotions and able to have those conversations. You're going to have people who don't have that for whatever reason. And then, like you say, even if you've got the most supportive family in the world, it's not unlikely that there'll come a time, usually in adolescence, when you don't want to talk to your mum, you don't want to talk to your dad. And like you mentioned, that is something that I've had said to me time and time again. We don't want to talk to mum. We don't want to talk to our doctor, who we've spoken to for years about my health. We need someone else. And what came through in the research is that having peer support, so someone who's like you, who's also been through the condition, is incredibly powerful. But also having someone external, someone who might be a psychologist, might be a support worker, someone who's clued up on the specific nature of RB and what that can, you know, how that can impact you, but also has some skills and techniques to offer that individual to try and make sense of what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think that's the purpose of everything I do with this project, with Your Unique Vision, is for people to be able to relate. I would hate to think that someone feels lonely anymore after they listen to any of my episodes, because they can, of course, reach out on social media, and I would gladly be there as much as I can for anyone that has gone through what I've gone through, if I can help them. And I do not remember growing up, I just couldn't relate to anybody, because I literally didn't know anybody that had gone through RB, because thankfully it's a very uncommon thing. And so for me, my identity was more around, oh, I'm visually impaired. Oh, I am have this condition with my eye. But it was never looking at it holistically from the moment my gene mutated in the womb to today, and tying everything together, if that makes sense. I never looked at it that way. And the fact that there's people like yourself conducting and creating these new ways of treating patients and just treating humans, really working with humans, that are just tying everything together and putting everything together, and it makes so much sense, and it gives a sense of, okay, it's not that everything's wrong with me, it's that this is a continuous story. This happened, and then there's this consequence, and there's obviously because of radiotherapy this, then I developed this, and so forth. But the whole not feeling lonely, I think, you know, as much as we hate social media sometimes and the internet, it's one of the beautiful things about it is that we can, you know, people like you and I, we can get together and create content for, because I wish I had episodes like this one when I was a teenager. I didn't know anybody. I remember I went on YouTube because I used to watch a lot of makeup tutorials, and I saw this girl from LA. She used to do fashion and makeup tutorials, and in one of her videos, she said, "Oh, it was a draw my life." It was a trend going on back in the day, and she was drawing her life, and she said, "So when I was a child, I had a very rare condition or an illness called retinoblastoma." And I was like, I remember pausing the video, was like, "What the hell?"
Yeah.
And that was so empowering. I cannot even describe it, because she was on YouTube, man. Like, she was on YouTube, and she had gone through RB.
Yeah.
And she was like having this amazing life that looked like, you know, the YouTube life. And I was like, yes, like I'm not that weird. Like, I'm a little weird, but not that weird. So yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you're doing now through your projects. You're being that person that other people, I was going to say younger, but anybody can look at and say, oh yeah, look what she's doing. This doesn't have to stop me either.
Yeah. Anybody. And literally that, anybody. So I would love for us to kind of like illustrate a bit more what this psychoeducation mean practically for people. Because again, going back to, I ramble a lot, going back to my initial point is, we get it, therapy is great, but not everybody has access to therapy. We get it, psychoeducation is great, but how does that look like? How does that sound like? What is it on a day-to-day? Because sometimes I do things that can seem really just normal things, like, for example, taking baths, right? For me, I just made it a thing where, for me, taking a bath is that time where I ground myself, and it's my safe space, and I decided for it to be that way and for it to be a ritual, and I developed that coping mechanism for myself. But so for the different people that we're talking to today, parents of children with RB, parents of children with RB that had already gone through surgery, teenagers, young adults, what does it look like?
Yeah, really good question. I think, like you say about different stages of life, it can look different for different people at different stages, but also, you know, can look very different from one individual to another. So we've obviously talked about therapy a lot, and as a health psychologist who offers therapy, I obviously advocate for that. I also receive my own therapy, and, you know, can advocate that it's a very useful tool, but not all people will want to sit down and talk about how they feel. It can be very challenging, and that isn't the only way to get support. So you mentioned enjoying having a bath, it being your safe place, and acts like that aren't very complicated, they're not expensive, they're not extravagant, can be really, really helpful in grounding you in feeling okay, feeling safe, and calming your nervous system to from the threat that it's perceiving. So, you know, it's about what's important to you as an individual. Do you like going for a walk? Do you like being out in nature? Do you like picking up the phone and talking to a friend? It can be very simple steps, but ultimately reconnecting with what's important to you, because that's something that we know amongst a lot of people who've had cancer or families of people going through cancer treatment is that their world gets a lot smaller, and that's through no fault for anybody. It just happens quite quickly and quite easily. So if you or your child are going through cancer treatment, you're often going to lots of appointments. You're going to be preoccupied with thinking about them or yourself and what might be going on and what might be happening next. You're likely to have lots of anxieties about what might happen in the future. And for RB, that can extend to thinking about, oh, will I get cancer again? Or what's going to happen when I want my own children? Those are all common anxieties that I hear a lot. And because all of that is going on, which is a huge amount to manage, things that you used to engage with, whether it's a dance class or a coffee with friends or whatever it is, work or school even, they drop off a little bit and life becomes about cancer. So what we know is that centering around your values and what's important to you can be a really helpful step to getting back to where you want to be. And actually that is the ethos of one of the therapies that I use a lot, called acceptance and commitment therapy. We talked a lot about acceptance earlier, and that's not to say, diminish a difficult experience like someone's had, like cancer, but to say, okay, this happened, let's change our relationship with our thoughts and feelings about this and feel sad and angry and upset that this happened, but also think, what do I want for the future and what is possible for me too?
Definitely. I want to dive into that with you because I feel like that literally is what marked the before and after for me in my journey, acceptance. But before we dive into that, I want to clarify that we're not saying that taking a bath or things like taking a bath are going to be the things that are going to completely transform the way you deal with your trauma, because we don't want to underestimate, especially me. I mean, I go through it. But trust me, I don't want to underestimate it. What being an RB survivor is, and going through it on a daily basis, it can be really hard. It can be, and it is, a very big thing, right? Yeah. It's a huge thing. So I'm not saying that meditating for 5 minutes in the morning and taking a bath is the way to solve your problems and deal with your trauma at all. But something I do want to emphasize is, even though the problems seem to be huge and what you're dealing with feels like an enormous weight on your shoulders, believe it or not, the solution is not equally and proportionate. It's not proportionate to the size of the problem, if that makes sense. It's not because the problem feels huge, and it is huge, that the solution is going to be this huge thing. There's amazing therapist that is going to come and save your life. There's expensive course that is going to... It's not the case at all. It's the little things. And that's why I think that's what Nicola and I are trying to... It's the message that we're trying to get across. And she makes like great points in her studies talking about co-designing it and co-production, and always in collaboration with the patient, because it's unique to you. Is what makes you feel better, is what makes you feel safer, is what makes you feel like you can process it better. And for someone can mean going to the gym, someone else can mean focusing on their diet, someone else can mean taking baths. And it's not just that, it's the combination of a lifestyle. And I think, Nicola, you speak a lot about behavior as well.
Yeah, I think, again, lots of really interesting points there. And like Anna said, just to reiterate that it's not that, doing one simple thing is going to change or magic away your problem. But what we know is that when we connect with things that make us feel good, it can help us to manage those difficult feelings rather than just being trapped in your own head, feeling really rubbish because of something really awful that's happened.
Yeah.
And you mentioned co-design as well. So I'm, you use the word patient a lot. That's actually not a term that I like to use because I kind of feel like it implies that I'm a sort of expert, that you're coming to me, you're coming to me to tell you what to do. And that's not how I work at all. So I almost see it more of a partnership. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, both in research and clinically. You are the expert on you. I will never, ever know you in the way that you do. No one will. So you bring that and I bring some of the skills and techniques that I have through my training to collaborate on supporting you in a way that works for you, because that's going to look very different for everybody.
Yeah.
And that works in research as well. So I'm really keen on, survivors of RB influencing the research at every stage, making sure that it reflects what they've told me, because I could sit here and say, this is what I think will be a really great intervention for you. But I'm not someone who's got RB. I'm not someone who's had cancer myself. I don't know. And if it doesn't reflect the interests and needs of you guys, then what's the point in doing it?
I love that. That's a beautiful collaboration and a gap that I saw as well. Again, for me, creating this project, my sole purpose is to bring value, and for people to be able to consume the content that I wish was available for me. So I saw a gap in a way, because we had content and information coming from experts like yourself, extremely educated, extremely knowledgeable on the facts and the science and the research and all of that. But ultimately, there is a huge part that the patient plays. I call us patients, but
and that's okay too.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we leave things and we see things and we feel things that you will never be able to leave and feel. And I can have a level of understanding and empathy towards my fellow patients that it's impossible for a doctor to have, as well as it's impossible for me to know the ins and outs of science. And so it's a beautiful collaboration that I think it's really important. And I always say it's really important to follow your doctor's guidance and to research your pathology and all of that. But it's also key for you to take ownership of your life ultimately and your health and what you're going through, and understand what you've gone through, and every treatment that you undertake, every surgery that you undertake, if you have to, everything from psychological to actually to do with your eyes and different parts of your eyes, everything that you take orally, honestly, anything, please understand it, at least understand it, know what it is that you're doing, and be in tune, in being in sync with your body and knowing how to listen to it, because a lot of the times these are, again, very complex things. Retinoblastoma RB is really complex. It can be really complex, and the different, pathologies that you develop from it can be really complex, and we get scared and we feel like we're not able to follow through, and we're just like, at some point, okay, just go to the doctor and you guys know what you're doing, do whatever you want with me, which is great, but you have to be part of that. It's a team effort.
Yeah.
And that's why that motivates me to create more content like this, just so that people gets more involved with their own journey as an RB survivor, and any other conditions I touch on this project. But
yeah, and I think that's totally right. And the feedback that I've had is that the medical care, that people receive for their RB is, you know, phenomenal. And through no fault of anybody, the psychological support just hasn't been there because it's not something that's been recognised. So, like you say, I think it's really important to be empowered in your own health and your own condition, and work with your medical professionals, your psychologists, if you see one, to find something that works for you. You know, it's really difficult sometimes to even know what you need, and having that trust with your doctors, with your clinicians, will enable you to, you know, come up with something that works for you. Yeah.
And so on that, empowering, I have a love and hate relationship with that word, because whereas I want people to be empowered, I want them to be empowered individually, and I want that power to come from inside. I think that, you know, we should not depend on any podcaster or any therapist or any doctor to give us that power and allow us to, you know, do the work and take ownership, as I said, and stuff. So
I think that's probably where I'm so passionate about the sort of education bit of the psychoeducation, because if you have the amount of knowledge that you want, that's you know, suitable for you at different ages and stages of your life, you can then make informed choices about your medical care or your psychological care, even if that is, you know, not formalized in terms of therapy. It might be, you know, like we said, doing something at home. You know, you need that education, which I'm passionate about giving people at a younger age, so that they have the vocabulary to express how they're feeling about something that's really traumatic.
Yes. And on that, again, we mentioned briefly before the word acceptance.
Yeah.
And I know you and I, we spoke about how that personally for me changed my journey, as in mental health wise, and my whole approach to me, my physical appearance, to my life, to the reality of my life. And how I think for many people, regardless of the thing that they deal with, regardless of that being RB or not, it's just key. And it seems to be a point that once you go over it and once you understand it, it just changes the whole, it just changes people's lives. What are your thoughts on acceptance in this case?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I've heard from you and from others that once you are supported to get to a place where you can think, look, this has happened to me. It's never going to be a good thing that this happened, but it doesn't have to determine the rest of my life. It can be transformative, but I think getting to that position is often really challenging, as I know you can testify. But I think through my research and through listening to the voices of people that we don't actually get to hear from very often, people who have had RB, and, you know, it's a rare cancer, it's not widely thought about, we can help you guys to get to that place of acceptance much sooner, and treat yourselves with some compassion, because I hear a lot of sort of blame and shame around, you know, I think you were saying earlier about, you know, feeling bad for putting your parents in a situation, in your words, of having had RB, and that's just such a huge thing to carry around with you.
Yeah. You were speaking earlier about why is it that, you know, teenagers don't want to talk to their parents about certain things, and a lot of the times I was telling Nicole that a lot of the times I feel like that even as an adult, because realistically our parents have gone through as much suffering perhaps as we have, because I mean, I'm not a mom yet, but I can only imagine what it is to. And listen, like I've heard my mom saying a million times, if I could change the situation around and be me having cancer instead of you, I would not doubt it for a second. And so I say that to say, when you're a parent of a child with RB, it's a very, very tough thing to go through, and we could do a whole nother episode about it. And the psychological impact that it has on you, the things that they go through, the guilt sometimes, the being feeling lost. I don't know how to be a parent of a kid like this, and how it's really hard. And as an adult, I feel like sometimes, and I don't know if anyone listening can relate, but I feel like I know now that this is not going to end for me. I'm going to live with this forever, but it can end for my mom. The suffering can end, if you know what I mean. I do not want to worry her anymore. I don't want her to be worried. And also coming from a selfish place, because if she gets worried, if I don't feel well, then I have two worries. I don't feel well, plus my mom doesn't feel well because I don't feel well. So it gives me even more worry and anxiety knowing that she's not well because of me. And it's an immense amount of guilt. And my whole thought process, I remember like when I went through, sometimes, I've been through crisis of having a really high eye pressure and we couldn't figure it out, or having ulcers in my cornea, and just seeing how she was really worried about it just made me feel worse. And also again the guilt of, man, like I know I have to deal with this, but it can't stop for her at some point. So yeah, totally, it is the case. But
it's so difficult, isn't it? And I think you touch on, parents are, given that RB is typically diagnosed when children and babies are really, really little. It's the parents that are given all the information, have to manage the impact of treatment on their child, and the psychological impact of that. I mean, that's a whole other research project. But what I think is really touching, but also really sad, is I hear from both angles of the people who've had RB and the parents that they have so much worry about hurting each other. So like you said, you as the person who had RB don't want to cause your mum additional worry, and have got parents saying, oh, we know we're holding all this anxiety and we don't want to influence them. We want them to have a sort of normal, whatever that looks like, childhood. So there's a lot of concern for the other people in your life, which is huge when you're already managing a whole lot of stuff for yourself.
And it's a lot about not showing weakness, the fear of being vulnerable in such a way, because you don't want anyone to see you as weak, unable to do certain things, or so let alone people that you are trying to impress constantly. Because I feel like our parents' approval for each and one of us is huge. It's huge. And the fact that, for me, and again, I only speak for myself, and hopefully someone can relate, but for me, my parents seeing me as an achiever, as a successful person, it was the main thing. So the fact that I would show vulnerability and show weakness to them, it was really hard. It wasn't something that I was comfortable with. And in general, I took that and and brought that with me to every other area in my life. I remember we were speaking one time about how my behavior changed in the corporate world as well. And how at the beginning I wasn't comfortable with showing any kind of vulnerability, to the point that I would lie through trainings and said I could see the screen and be there for an hour taking a training that by the end of it, it's like you've shown me nothing because I couldn't see all the way through. But I wasn't brave enough or strong enough to say, hey, actually, this doesn't work for me. Why don't you show it to me on a video call where I can adapt my screen? Or walk in a room having these preconceived ideas about yourself of around, I'm disabled, I'm not good enough, and now I'm going to sit in this meeting and they're perhaps going to tell me to read the screen and I'm not going to be able to do so. And then if I sit in the front, they're going to think I'm sitting in the front because I can't see, obviously, because what else are they going to think? And how that thing that we talked about before about acceptance and accepting is just a thing that when you understand it and implement it, like, and apply it, it just untangles so many other things, such as how you see yourself.
Yeah.
And therefore how you present yourself. And therefore how you educate people to see you.
Yeah.
And how it doesn't matter how good society is in terms of understanding and not discriminating, and how many HR rules we implement and how much we don't judge because we're amazing people. If you, inside of you, you don't accept yourself, you don't accept your reality, your life is going to continue to be hell on earth. And you're never going to perform. It's funny because we're doing that so that people don't think that we cannot perform, but we're shooting ourselves in the foot, because you will never perform in that environment because it's not fair to you, if you know what I mean. It's like making a fish swim in oil almost instead of water. It's like you're not doing yourself any favor. So when I accepted my reality, and again, I want to make a point really clear, accepting your reality doesn't mean that you surrender and you give up and you let your condition define you, and you let the things that you cannot do define you, and you all of a sudden become this victim and this poor disabled person that is just able to do so much. That is not acceptance. And I feared that all throughout my life, that oh no way, I cannot surrender to accepting the fact that I'm going through all these illnesses and all these things that literally condition my day-to-day life. Because if I do that, if I accept it, it means I'm okay with it. And it means that's who I am now. And that's not who I want to be. I want to be a winner. I want to achieve. I want to be successful. It doesn't need to be the case.
No.
And I think you agree with me on that because we spoke about it. It's not surrendering. It doesn't mean you need to stop. Yeah,
completely. And what we're saying is not an easy thing. It often takes a long time to, in small amounts, begin to accept that this really rubbish, awful thing happened to me. Unfortunately, I can't change that, but I can go on, and it doesn't have to define me and my identity. So we know that young people who've experienced cancer, particularly cancer that can impact the way that you look, as can be the case with RB, these people are at higher risk of what we call identity-related distress. And I think a lot of that is what you've just spoken about. You so eloquently spoke about, all the different worries that you had when you first went into the corporate world of work, and how actually it's really hard to put yourself out there and go, actually, this isn't working for me. That's a huge skill that most of us aren't taught how to do. And like you said, it could be through fear of judgment or fear of what people are going to think of me. So acceptance is not about thinking, oh, hey, I had cancer, that's great. Not at all. It's about acknowledging it has happened, feeling whatever you feel about it, whether it's neutral, it's something that happened, or, you know, devastated, it's impacted me today. Either of those, anything in between is fine. It's about not allowing it to take you away from what's important to you now, and building your life around that not being your only, and it's only one part of your story. It's not the whole thing. It's not your whole identity. And that's where psychoeducation can be one tool to try and make that a bit easier.
Exactly that. And exactly that psychoeducation is what allowed me to decode what acceptance meant for me. Because acceptance in practice has as many meanings as people there is. I feel like, and it's unique to you. And some people approach their health conditions in a way that would never work for me.
Yeah.
Perhaps, for example, and because I love to give examples, because again, these big concepts, I just love to break them down, and for myself, some people go about it with an enormous amount of just wonderful humor, right? And they laugh about it and they make jokes about it. That was never my thing.
Yeah.
I never felt comfortable doing that, and that's totally fine. So acceptance, you need to figure out what accepting means for you, because some of the things that I had to that I struggled accepting, you could be totally fine with. And some of the things that, you know, it's really hard for you to accept, I don't really care about.
Yeah.
So I remember speaking with this RB survivor, and she was telling me how, you know what, like, I can't relate with people when they say, oh, my physical appearance, this, that, like, I became really insecure. And she said, I actually never cared about how I look. Like, it wasn't a thing for me. However, the fact that I couldn't play volleyball, because obviously she couldn't see through one eye, really, really, really bothered me, because I really wanted to do that. And I felt like I wasn't able, literally. Something was wrong with me. I was like a machine that's not working, and it should be working, and I would get really angry. And I went, wow, like, people just have different things to accept.
Yeah, and you're allowed to feel however you feel. There's no right or wrong. You know, we're all individuals in life, and even if you've had one type of cancer, it's still unique to you in the way that it's affected you and how you feel about it, which is why I suppose I'm so keen to talk to as many people as possible who have had RB, because everyone is different. You know, I don't want to make any assumptions about what your experiences are, or what's helpful or not, because although when working with people therapeutically, one-on-one, it can be very tailored to that person who's sat in front of me. With this research, we want to develop a tool that's accessible to as many people as possible. And hopefully, once we've shown that it's effective and helpful to people, that can be rolled out into sort of routine clinical practice in the NHS, whether it's at the 2 treatment centres in the UK, Birmingham and London, or, you know, in an ideal world, maybe worldwide too, because it's not just a UK-based condition. So that's why it's so important to me, particularly as someone who's not had RB themselves, to get your input, because, like I keep saying, you guys are the experts.
Yeah, and co-designing that solution ultimately for the patient. But again, for me, the next level from acceptance was now, okay, now what am I going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
So I get it. This is it. Whatever it is. I'm not saying RB. I'm saying what that means for you. I get it. I look like this, or I cannot drive. I won't ever be able to drive. There's a million things that, you name it, you'd have to accept. Now what? For me, focusing on the things that you are able to do instead of the things that you're not able to do. It's a completely shift on where you spend your energy
Mm-hmm.
and where you train your mind to go. I don't know if you agree with me that training your mind to go to places that actually are beneficial and, you know, help you grow in a positive way and just navigate life better. It's really important is the behavior, is the patterns that you create for yourself slowly.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those things that's easier said than done. So hopefully if we can equip as many young people who've had RB to have these skills and techniques to be able to think, what's important to me? What do I want to get out of life? This has happened to me. There may be some practical limitations, you know, like you said, you won't ever be able to drive. That is unfortunately going to be unchangeable. But what can I do?
Exactly.
And where can I go with what's important to me?
Exactly.
So I think that's where supporting people from a younger age so that they don't get tangled in this web of, I can't do this. What are people thinking about me? You know, life is awful. Get there before that happens and it'll be a much easier road than having to go back in at a crisis point and think, right, how could we have helped you before this all began?
Right. However, we are both of us, I say we because both of us, we are all about creating content to help people. We're there for the people that, like myself, my generation, that didn't have access to maybe the psychological help, and so now we have to deal with the consequences of all that.
Yeah.
But also the younger generations that could do a lot better than that. So yeah, I mean, your work and my work, I mean, can be just applied to, as I said, different stages of the post RB journey and any traumatic, post-traumatic journey. But tell us about your next paper and what's to come for the RB community in specific from you and the wonderful work that you're doing.
So ultimately the big project that I'm working on at the moment and have been for some time is about this psychoeducation that I keep going on about, but proposing a new support tool for young people who've had RB. And so because I want to hear from the people who've been there and lived it, I conducted these interviews with yourself and 31 others that I'm coming to the end of looking at now, because there's so many rich experiences that people have kindly shared with me that it's taken a while to get through them all. But what I'm looking for next is for a small group of RB survivors to be involved in looking at the findings and discussing what they mean, because I want this work to continuously reflect the views of the people who are going to find this the most important. And what I think is quite exciting about this is anybody that does get involved would have the opportunity to be named as a co-author on any publications that come from this, which you know is great if you want to get into research or just raise awareness about RB. You know, being named as a co-author recognises, I think, the huge impact that you as individuals with lived experience can have. So there's that. And then as I've said all the way through, I will continuously welcome volunteers to get involved with the research and actually help me to propose what the intervention will look like, because I don't want to sit here and say I think it should be this, because ultimately you guys know more than me. So that's where we're at, and then after that it will be testing it out, seeing if it's helpful, and then hopefully rolling it out for wider use.
Yes, I'm so excited and so proud of you, and I cannot wait. And I'm just so honored that I get to be part of all this, because I wish it was done earlier. We say that because but again, like, it came at the right time, and it's gonna impact a lot of people's lives, I'm sure. So I'm really excited for what's to come, and we'll continue to but we have already spoken about creating different episodes, not just this one, because we both want to bring value to the community at large and just provide the tools as much as we can, both of us in combination, right? Co-designing
absolutely.
every piece of content that we deliver, so that we can serve the community and help you navigate all those big concepts such as acceptance and mindfulness and
could do a whole episode
on each
tools
and
and techniques
them. And
equally would love to come back and share the results of this first study, because I think it is really interesting, if I do say so myself.
It is. It's amazing.
And thank you again for inviting me on and for giving so much to, the RB community, both through my work but through other work. You're doing a great job, and as I've said before, it's definitely will be an inspiration to many people who are struggling with the impact of having had cancer as well.
No, thank you for allowing me to be part of it, for all the work that you're doing for us. I just have the utmost respect for people like yourself. I think I'm a bit of a frustrated doctor. I decided to go business routes, but I'm just beyond grateful to have met you and do this together with you.
Likewise.
So thank you for being here, and for many more.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing this space and this time with us today by listening to this episode. Remember, you can find me online pretty much everywhere, but on social media under Your Unique Vision. I would love to hear what you take away from this episode, as well as every single one of your stories. Until the next one, focus on what you can do and take care of your vision.